You're not even Beatrice's real granddaughter, Gregory snapped, his voice slicing through the silence of the library. The oak-paneled walls, lined with leather-bound books and polished maritime relics, echoed his rage like it belonged to the house itself. I froze, still in my black funeral dress, my eyes locked on the fire crackling in the hearth. Just 3 days after burying my grandmother, the woman who raised me with warmth and wisdom, and already, the war for her legacy had begun. "What are you talking about?" I whispered, the question catching in my throat like a splinter. Gregory, the man I'd called Dad for 27 years, looked at me with contempt I had only ever felt in fragments, quiet sighs, condescending silences, withering glances, but never this openly. "Your mother's secret didn't stay buried," he said, pacing slowly across the Persian rug. "Soon, the lawyers will confirm it. You're not blood. And the Whitmore fortune belongs to blood." His words crashed into me like waves against the cliffside the mansion overlooked. I stared at the portrait of Grandmother Beatrice above the fireplace, her strong jaw, silver hair pinned tight, eyes sharp and serene. She had always spoken to me with pride, called me her granddaughter without hesitation, without doubt. "So you're saying I'm not a Whitmore?" I asked, my voice steadier than I felt. "You're not my daughter," Gregory declared, chin lifted in that familiar, self-righteous tilt. "And that means you're not part of this inheritance." My knees nearly buckled, but I caught the edge of the desk behind me. "So what happens now?" I said quietly. "Now," he said, turning for the door, "you stay out of the way. You're free to attend the will reading next week if you must. But don't expect anything. I've already spoken to Alan about challenging any clauses that mention you." Alan Sykes, our longtime family lawyer, cold, calculating, and loyal to Gregory, the man who had drafted every amendment to the estate documents over the last decade. I didn't respond. I couldn't. Not yet. I waited until he left the room, then sat down in Beatrice's old writing chair. My hand ran across the walnut desk she had used every Sunday afternoon. The same place where she taught me how to write a thank you letter, how to draft a grant proposal, how to read people through their words. My phone buzzed. A message from my mother, Lillian. "We need to talk. Tonight. Alone." My stomach twisted. I had 1,000 questions, but only one mattered right now. If Gregory wasn't my father, then who was? That evening, I met my mother at a small cafe near the harbor, the one with chipped teacups and handwritten menus, where she felt safe. She looked tired. Not just grief tired, but truth tired. Her hands trembled as they held her cup. "I didn't want you to hear it from him," she began. "It was never supposed to come out like that." "Is it true?" I asked. "He's not my father?" She nodded slowly. "It's complicated." And so, she began to unravel the past. Years ago, before she married Gregory, she had fallen in love with his younger brother, Nathan. He was vibrant, driven, brilliant, a rising star in medical research who had just been offered a fellowship overseas. "We thought we'd make it work long distance," she said, her voice distant with memory. "But things fell apart. I was young, confused. Gregory was always around, always ready to pick up the pieces. A brief affair, a rushed marriage, a pregnancy. She was certain the child was Nathan's, but Gregory, ambitious and strategic, had already laid his claim. He needed a wife, she said bitterly, and a child to secure his standing with the family trust. And I needed stability. Her eyes filled with tears. I made a deal I didn't fully understand, and I kept it for 27 years. The air between us felt heavier than before. I wanted to be angry. Maybe I was. But mostly, I felt hollow. Like everything I believed about myself had cracked open. "Does Nathan know?" I asked. "No," she said. "I never told him. He was already married by the time I found out. And by then, I thought it was too late. I leaned back, staring through the window at the black waves rolling into the harbor. If it was true, if Nathan Whitmore was my father, then Gregory's entire accusation was a twisted half-truth. I was still a Whitmore. Still Beatrice's blood. Just not the blood Gregory wanted. You need to protect yourself, my mother said. He'll do anything to cut you out. I nodded slowly. Then I'll need proof. That night, I found myself driving toward the university medical campus where Nathan worked. He still lived in Newport, though rarely attended family events. I remembered flashes of him from childhood, his kind eyes, his thoughtful gifts, the way he listened when no one else did. I wasn't sure how I'd find the words. How do you ask a man if he might be your father? I didn't sleep. I wrote down everything I needed to say. And as the sun rose over the Whitmore mansion the next morning, gilding the windows in gold, I knew something else with absolute clarity. I wasn't going to let Gregory rewrite my life. Not without a fight. I stood outside Dr. Nathan Whitmore's office, staring at the frosted glass pane that bore his name. The hallway was quiet, filled only with the low hum of distant lab equipment and the muffled echoes of student footsteps. I hadn't scheduled a formal meeting. I had simply called and asked if we could speak privately about family matters. The way his tone shifted told me he already suspected something. When he opened the door, he looked just as I remembered, perhaps older, with silver at his temples and lines around his eyes, but still possessing that calm gravity that had made him my favorite adult growing up. Isla, he said gently, stepping aside to let me in. Come in. His office was warm and modest, books stacked neatly beside framed photos of global health missions and research teams. I sat across from him, clutching the letter I had written but now could not bring myself to unfold. I appreciate you seeing me, I began. I know this is sudden. You seemed troubled on the phone, he said. And I sensed it wasn't just grief for Beatrice. I hesitated. Did you and my mother ever have a relationship before she married Gregory? His brow furrowed slightly, the teacup in his hand suspended mid-air. That was a long time ago, he said slowly. Why are you asking? I forced the words out. Because Gregory told me he's not my biological father. And now he's using that to try and disinherit me from grandmother's estate. He says I'm not a real Whitmore. Nathan's teacup clinked softly onto its saucer. His expression changed, first confusion, then something I hadn't expected, sorrow. What did Lillian say? She told me that she and you were in love, that you left for a fellowship, that after a difficult time apart, she ended up with Gregory. But she always believed I was yours. He leaned back slowly in his chair, his eyes searching my face. I never knew, he said. Your mother never told me she was pregnant. By the time I heard she had married Gregory, I assumed it was his child. The silence stretched, loaded with all the years between us. He looked at me closely, and for the first time I saw it too, the reflection of his gaze in my own eyes. I'd like to know the truth, I said. And if you're willing, I'd like to take a DNA test. Just to be sure. He nodded without hesitation. Yes, of course. If there's even a chance, we should know. We arranged for a private lab to conduct an expedited test. They promised results within 72 hours, just enough time before the rescheduled will reading. After submitting our samples that afternoon, we stood in the quiet hallway, unsure of what to say. If the test confirms it, I said softly, that I'm your daughter, I don't know what comes next. Nathan placed a hand gently on my shoulder. Then we take it one day at a time. No matter what happens, I want you to know, you are not alone in this. For the first time since Gregory's outburst, I felt a flicker of something new. Not clarity, not closure, but possibility. The next day, I went to see Beatrice's private attorney, Raymond Carter. His office was across town, tucked behind an antique bookshop. Unlike Alan Sykes, who had always played politics for Gregory, Raymond had been chosen by grandmother herself for matters of personal trust. He greeted me with cautious professionalism, offering tea and ushering me into a room that smelled of parchment and pine. "I know you can't disclose the contents of the will," I said, "but I need to know something." He raised an eyebrow. "Go on." Did grandmother suspect that Gregory wasn't my father? Did she know the truth? Raymond folded his hands and took a long breath. Ms. Whitmore was a deeply intelligent woman. She saw more than most gave her credit for. I cannot speak about her suspicions, but I can tell you this. She prepared her estate documents with careful foresight. She anticipated family conflict. She took steps. He paused. There is also a sealed letter from her. One she instructed me to open only if a matter of lineage arose during the reading. That was enough. More than enough. Grandmother had seen this coming. She had left a trail of light in the darkness I was stumbling through. But by the time I returned home that evening, a thick envelope was waiting for me, delivered by courier, stamped with a seal of Sykes and Associates. A formal petition from Alan Sykes, Gregory's attorney, requesting that the will reading be delayed due to pending clarification of beneficiary eligibility. He was trying to stall, to isolate me, to manipulate the process. I called Raymond at once, but his secretary informed me he had been hospitalized with pneumonia that morning and would be unavailable for the foreseeable future. My heart sank. It couldn't be coincidence. Gregory was clearing the board of anyone who might oppose him. That night, my mother called me in a panic. "Gregory knows you spoke to Nathan. He's furious. Please, Isla, be careful. He's not above threatening people when he feels cornered." I locked my doors and sat up late, reading over the test request, the trust clauses, and my grandmother's last known statements. Everything was spinning. But in the chaos, one thing held steady, the quiet certainty behind my grandmother's voice the last time I saw her. "Trust your instincts, Isla. The truth always finds a way." 2 days later, I received the results in an encrypted email from the lab. My hands shook as I opened the file, scanning the dense scientific text until I reached the conclusion. Probability of paternity, 99.99998%. Dr. Nathan Whitmore was, without question, my biological father. I sat motionless for a long time, emotions crashing like waves. Relief, sorrow, vindication, anger. A lifetime of half-understood pain finally made sense. Gregory had called me an outsider, but by his own logic, I was more Whitmore than he ever was. The war for the truth was just beginning. But I was no longer walking into it alone. The day after the DNA results arrived, I received an unexpected call from Alan Sykes. His voice was clipped, measured, as if each word had been polished to perfection before it left his lips. "Isla," he said, "Gregory has asked me to speak with you before the will reading. He would prefer this matter be handled discreetly. Could you stop by my office this afternoon?" Discreetly. The word tasted like ash. I agreed, more out of curiosity than anything. There was nothing Gregory could say that would change the truth. But I wanted to hear what desperate sounded like from a man who had spent years pretending to be untouchable. The law offices of Sykes and Associates overlooked the harbor, all glass and white marble, cold, expensive, and soulless. Alan greeted me with the same silk-gloved manner he always had. But behind his tailored suit and immaculate desk, I could see it, tension. He wasn't as in control as he wanted me to believe. "Thank you for coming," he said, gesturing for me to sit. "This situation with the estate, it's unfortunate. But perhaps there's a way to avoid unnecessary conflict." I raised an eyebrow. "Conflict you initiated by challenging my place in the will?" He offered a thin smile. Let's not point fingers. The important thing is that Gregory is willing to offer a generous resolution, privately. He slid a folder across the desk. Inside was a contract. Legalese wrapped around a dollar amount. $250,000. A single lump sum. In exchange for one thing, I would relinquish all rights, present or future, to Beatrice Whitmore's estate. I closed the folder without reading further. You're trying to buy my silence. I'm offering you security, he corrected. Gregory is prepared to be aggressive, Isla. A legal battle could be long, ugly, public. Are you certain you want that? I stared at him. You've seen the DNA results. He tilted his head slightly, betraying no surprise. I've seen them. Then you know I'm Beatrice's only blood granddaughter, which means I'm more entitled to her legacy than Gregory ever was. Alan leaned forward. There are complexities to the Whitmore Trust. Clauses written long ago. Language that may disqualify you despite the biology. I didn't blink. You mean clauses that Gregory believes will protect him, even now? I'm simply advising caution, he said. Walk away now, and you walk away wealthy and unburdened. I stood slowly. Tell Gregory this. He taught me that only blood matters, that only real Whitmores deserve the fortune. I'm going to hold him to that. His face darkened. Then I suggest you prepare yourself. He won't back down. Outside, the cold November air bit into my skin as I walked toward my car. My breath came in short clouds. The wind howled between the buildings. I should have been afraid. Instead, I felt more awake than I had in days. But the worst shock hadn't arrived yet. That night, Nathan called me. His voice was tight, every word sharp and deliberate. Isla, he said, I just got off the phone with someone I never expected to hear from again. Her name is Martha DeLeon. She worked as a nurse in our family's private clinic, back when Gregory and I were children. I stopped pacing. What did she say? She confirmed something that changes everything. He took a breath. Gregory isn't a biological Whitmore. He was adopted. The world tilted around me. What? It was kept secret for years. Our mother had multiple miscarriages before I was born. When she and our father adopted Gregory, they decided never to tell anyone. When she became pregnant with me later, they kept the timeline quiet. I only found out because Martha recognized your name and called to check if you were related. I dropped into a chair, my heart thudding. Does Gregory know? I don't think so. I doubt even Alan knows. But Beatrice might have. She and my mother were very close. My mind raced. If Gregory wasn't a blood Whitmore, and if the trust required biological lineage, then his claim to the inheritance was weaker than mine. And the entire case he was building against me was built on a foundation of lies. That's why Alan seemed so confident, I whispered. He thinks he's playing with facts. But we have the truth. Exactly, Nathan said. We're not just defending your place anymore. We're proving Gregory never had one. We agreed to gather the proof, old documents, medical records, anything that supported the adoption claim. Nathan reached out to Martha again, who promised to search her files from the clinic's archive. And just in case, I called Raymond Carter's office. To my surprise, Raymond had checked himself out of the hospital. He sounded tired but resolute. I'll be at the will reading, he said. And I'll bring the letter from Beatrice. I think it's time the truth is spoken aloud. The morning of the reading arrived with cold wind and a sky bruised by clouds. The Whitmore estate looked untouched by time, its tall windows gleaming, its iron gates open, waiting. Inside, the family had gathered. Gregory sat at the head of the table, flanked by my half-brothers, Ethan and Julian. They looked uncomfortable. Not hostile. Just uncertain. My mother sat beside me, her hand tight around mine. And across the room, Nathan stood alone, calm and watchful. Alan Sykes cleared his throat and opened the folder in front of him. "Before we begin," he said, "there are matters of eligibility we must address." Gregory leaned back in his chair with smug assurance. "There have been revelations about Isla's parentage," he said. "She is not my daughter, and therefore not eligible for the Whitmore Trust, which requires direct bloodline descent." He slid a folder forward, his own DNA test results. The ones he had taken without my knowledge, using a water glass from dinner weeks ago. "I have the evidence right here," he said triumphantly. I kept my voice steady. "May I ask how you obtained my DNA, Gregory?" He smirked. "Simple. A fork. You left it behind at the mansion. Perfectly legal." "It's not," Nathan cut in. "It's an invasion of privacy." Alan waved a hand. "The results are what matter." I rose from my chair. "Then let's discuss results." I pulled out my own document, the one from the legitimate lab. "This is the verified DNA test between myself and Dr. Nathan Whitmore. It confirms a 99.99998% probability of paternity." Gasps rippled through the room. I turned to Alan. "According to the trust, inheritance flows through biological descendants of Harold Whitmore, Beatrice's father. Is that correct?" "Yes," Alan replied stiffly. "Then we have a bigger problem," Nathan said, stepping forward. "Because Gregory Whitmore is not biologically related to Harold. He was adopted, and we have documentation to prove it." The room froze. Gregory paled. Alan opened his mouth to object, but the library doors swung wide before he could speak. Raymond Carter entered, leaning on a cane, eyes sharp despite his pallor. "Apologies for the delay," he said, holding up a sealed envelope with the Whitmore crest. "Beatrice left me with instructions, and I believe today is the day they are meant to be fulfilled." Every voice in the room fell silent as Raymond Carter stepped into the Grand Whitmore Library, the seal of Beatrice's personal letter still unbroken in his hand. His presence, once taken for granted during family gatherings, now felt like the arrival of a final judge. "I apologize for my delayed appearance," Raymond said calmly, his gaze sweeping across the faces around the long mahogany table. "I was under doctor's orders to rest, but Miss Whitmore's instructions to me were quite specific. If questions of bloodline or lineage arose during the reading of her will, I was to read this letter before any distributions took place." Alan Sykes looked visibly uncomfortable. Gregory's face had gone a shade closer to ivory. For the first time since this began, he didn't look angry. He looked afraid. Raymond sat slowly at the head of the table and carefully broke the wax seal, the crisp snap echoing through the room. He unfolded the parchment with reverent precision. The Whitmore crest glinted in gold embossment at the top. Then, in a steady voice, he began to read. "To my family, seated in my library, if this letter is being read aloud, then the secret I protected for most of my life has come into the open." I felt the breath leave my chest. Every eye was fixed on Raymond now. I have known for many years that Gregory was not born of my blood. He was welcomed into this family through adoption after years of grief and loss. He became my son in every way but biology. My husband and I made the decision not to speak of it, believing love would be enough. But love does not erase truth. A murmur rippled across the room. Ethan and Julian exchanged shocked glances. My mother closed her eyes, her grip on my hand tightening. "I also knew," Raymond continued reading, "that my granddaughter Isla was not Gregory's child, but Nathan's. From the moment I first held her, I recognized the eyes of my youngest son. A grandmother knows." I chose to remain silent, not from shame, but from wisdom. The truth always reveals itself in time. Gregory rose to his feet. "This is nonsense," he barked. She was senile. "This letter means nothing." Raymond didn't flinch. Beatrice Whitmore revised her will only 3 months before her passing. She was of sound mind, and I had her medically evaluated before each update. The letter is dated and notarized. "I advise you to sit down, Gregory." Gregory hesitated, but the authority in Raymond's tone pinned him in place. "The Whitmore Trust," Raymond continued, "requires that beneficiaries be direct biological descendants of Harold Whitmore. Gregory, by your own arguments and evidence, has insisted that only true bloodlines qualify." He looked directly at Gregory, then at me. "By your standards, Gregory, you have disqualified yourself. And by the truth Beatrice knew, Isla is the only living grandchild in this room who carries Harold Whitmore's blood." A stunned hush filled the air. Alan Sykes opened his mouth, then shut it again, knowing there was no legal ground left to stand on. Raymond pulled out a second set of documents from his briefcase. Beatrice structured her personal estate separately from the trust. She anticipated conflict, and she acted accordingly. These documents distribute her personal holdings, including the family mansion, private accounts, art, and jewelry, not to Gregory, but to Isla and Nathan. I sat frozen, barely able to breathe. My entire life, I had walked through these halls feeling like I had to prove I belonged. And now, in a single moment, I was no longer the outsider. I was the heir. Gregory lunged toward the documents, but Raymond shifted them away with a single, slow movement. "Sit down," he said again, more sharply this time. "You will have the opportunity to review everything in due course, but if you interrupt this proceeding again, I will have you removed." Gregory's hands shook. "You promised," he hissed at me. "You stood in Beatrice's study and said bloodline was everything. You used my own words against me." I met his eyes, calm and unyielding. "You said only true blood deserves the fortune. I simply asked if you meant it, and you swore you did." He stood, fists clenched, but there was nothing left for him to do. His power was gone, stripped not by revenge, but by his own logic, his own cruelty, and the very truths he weaponized against me. Raymond resumed. "In addition to the personal estate, the family trust will pass in full to Dr. Nathan Whitmore and his biological heir, Isla Whitmore. All other claims have been voided under the terms of the trust's bloodline clause." Gregory's chair scraped loudly as he stormed from the room, muttering threats no one believed. Alan Sykes followed, pale and shaken. His silence was more condemning than any word he could have spoken. Ethan and Julian remained seated. It was Ethan who finally broke the stillness. "I didn't know," he said quietly. "None of us knew. But you're still our sister, Isla. That doesn't change." Julian nodded slowly. "You never acted like anything else." Tears burned behind my eyes, but I blinked them away. Nathan placed a hand gently on my shoulder. "You did it," he said. "You didn't just win back your name. You reclaimed your story." Raymond gathered the papers into a leather case and stood. Beatrice would be proud. She never wanted the fortune to reward cruelty. She wanted it to reflect truth. And for the first time in my life, I felt like the house I grew up in finally belonged to me. Not because it was written in a will, but because it was written in my blood. The air outside the Whitmore estate had a strange stillness after the storm. The sky was a blanket of gray, heavy with the smell of salt from the nearby coast, and the trees stood bare, as if they too were holding their breath. Inside, the echoes of the will reading still rang in my ears. Every word spoken by Raymond, every gasp from the family, every silent shift of power, it played over and over like a scene I couldn't walk away from. Gregory had always been a man of calculation. He didn't raise his voice unless it served a purpose. He didn't take chances unless the outcome was guaranteed. and for 27 years he had sculpted his image in this family as the rightful heir, the dutiful son, the protector of the Whitmore legacy. But in the span of 30 minutes, that legacy collapsed into dust. When he stormed out of the room, slamming the doors so hard they rattled the chandelier, I didn't follow. I didn't need to. The truth had already taken root. There was no running from it anymore. Raymond remained to answer questions, calmly passing out certified copies of the revised will and trust. He had included notarized letters from Beatrice detailing her reasoning and her deep belief that the future of the Whitmore estate should be based on integrity, not illusion. Alan Sykes was nowhere to be seen. His briefcase had been left behind, open, papers exposed, like the remnants of a lost battle. I stepped out into the foyer and found Nathan waiting near the portrait of Beatrice. He was staring at it with a quiet kind of reverence. "She knew this would happen," he said softly. "And still, she let us come to it in our own time." I stood beside him. "She trusted truth to win." Nathan turned to me with a small, proud smile. "And she trusted you to carry it." For a while, no one spoke. The house felt different now, not as cold, not as vast. Like it had finally exhaled after holding its breath for decades. And though I hadn't moved an inch, I felt as though I had traveled miles. That evening, the family guests dispersed. My brothers left without fanfare, offering quiet nods that held more meaning than words could. My mother lingered in the sitting room, hesitant, as if unsure whether she still belonged. I approached her gently. "You should have told me," I said. "Years ago." She looked up, regret etched into every line of her face. "I was scared," she whispered, "of what it would change, of what it would cost you." "It cost me anyway," I replied. "But I know you did what you thought was best. And I forgive you. I just need time." She nodded, a tear slipping down her cheek. "That's more than I deserve." Later that night, Nathan and I sat in Beatrice's study. The same room where it all began, where Gregory told me I wasn't his daughter, where I received my mother's text that shattered everything, where I began this impossible journey back to myself. The fire crackled low. The smell of aged wood and paper filled the space, grounding me. Nathan handed me a leather-bound photo album. "She left this for you," he said. Inside were pictures of my childhood, photos I had never seen. Me as a baby in Beatrice's arms. Me drawing at the kitchen table. Me running across the lawn barefoot in summer. But what stood out most were the handwritten notes in the margins. Her thoughts. Her memories. Her love. One entry read, "Isla reminds me of Nathan when he was young. Curious. Intense. Stubborn. She doesn't know it yet, but she carries the best of both of us." Tears welled up before I could stop them. Beatrice hadn't just known. She had loved me without question, without condition. While Gregory gave me silence and coldness, she gave me presence. She had never needed proof. She had simply believed in me. The next morning, a legal notice arrived. Gregory had filed an emergency injunction attempting to freeze the estate distribution. I took the letter to Raymond, who reviewed it without surprise. "This was expected," he said. "It will fail. We have precedent. We have documentation. But he's angry now. And dangerous." I nodded. Let him try. He built his kingdom on lies. It was always going to burn. A week later, I received word that Gregory had withdrawn the injunction. Rumors circulated through Newport that his law firm had dropped him. His business ties were fraying. Old allies were turning their backs. And for the first time in decades, the name Gregory Whitmore no longer carried weight. It carried shame. I didn't celebrate. It wasn't about revenge. It was about reclaiming the space I had been denied for so long. The house, now legally mine, stood quiet but alive. I moved in slowly, one room at a time. I reopened the east wing that had been sealed off for years. I found Beatrice's handwritten journals, her paintings, her unsent letters. I cataloged everything, not to archive the past, but to understand it, to honor it. Nathan visited often. We shared meals, stories, gaps in time we could never get back but could still stitch together. "I missed your first steps," he said once, his voice breaking. "But you're here for everything after," I replied. And that was enough. In the end, Gregory had taken everything from me he could, except the truth. And once the truth had space to breathe, it did what it always does. It lit everything up. The first winter in the house was quiet. Snow layered itself gently on the windowsills, turning the gardens into pale quilts of memory. The mansion no longer felt like a battlefield. It had shed its weight of secrets. Its walls, once witnesses to whispered betrayals and buried truths, now echoed with something else: peace. I moved slowly, room by room, restoring what felt worth keeping, letting go of what wasn't. I kept the oil portraits but took down the cold, curated family photo gallery Gregory had installed in the west corridor, images chosen for status, not warmth. I replaced them with real moments: a snapshot of me and Beatrice in the garden, Nathan teaching me how to use a microscope during one of his few holiday visits, a candid of my mother before she wore years of worry on her face. The library, once Gregory's territory, became my sanctuary. I reorganized the books the way Beatrice used to prefer them, by subject, not by spine color. On the fireplace mantel, I placed a framed photograph of her, one I'd found tucked inside her desk drawer. Beatrice in her 20s, standing on the cliffs of Rhode Island, the wind in her hair, her expression defiant and alive. Raymond stopped by once a week. Not as a lawyer, but as a friend. He'd become a fixture in this new chapter, part witness, part protector. We often drank coffee in the conservatory and watched the light stretch across the glass panes. "She always hoped this place would outlive the ugliness," he said one morning, his voice laced with memory. "Not just physically, but emotionally. She wanted it to become a place where truth could breathe again." I nodded. "I think it's finally becoming that." News of Gregory's fall spread through Newport's elite circles like fire through dry brush. He had been stripped of his board seats. Business partners distanced themselves with rapid efficiency. Old friends vanished. Even Alan Sykes was forced to issue a public statement denying involvement in Gregory's attempts to alter the estate. He sold his condo in the city. Rumors said he moved upstate. Alone. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt relief. Not because he was gone, but because he no longer hovered over every decision I made. For the first time in my life, I wasn't living to meet someone else's approval. I was living for myself. Nathan and I began a quiet ritual: Saturday walks along the cliffs. He'd bring coffee, I'd bring old stories. We talked about everything except what we had lost. It was too vast. Instead, we focused on what could still be built. One afternoon, while sorting through a box of Beatrice's correspondence, I found a letter addressed to me. The envelope was aged but sealed. My hands trembled as I opened it. Dearest Isla, if this letter finds you, then everything I knew in my bones has finally been spoken aloud, I want you to know that you were never a mistake. Not once. Not in the way you came into this family, not in the way you fought for your truth, and not in the way you carry both gentleness and fire in equal measure, Gregory built a legacy out of fear. You, my darling girl, will build one out of grace. I hope you fill this house with laughter again. I hope you never let anyone tell you what you are worth. You already know. And if you ever forget, read this again. Love, grandmother, I cried for hours after reading it, but it wasn't the kind of grief that left you hollow. It was the kind that cleared space inside your chest, like windows thrown open after a storm. Days turned into weeks. The mansion felt more like a home. I converted the old guest wing into a community history archive, a place where locals could visit, learn, and explore the stories Beatrice once told me in secret. I hired restoration students from nearby colleges. I gave internships to kids who reminded me of myself at 19, trying to find footing in a world that had been built before them. One afternoon, Julian visited. He walked through the halls slowly, like he was searching for a memory. "I almost didn't come," he admitted. "I'm glad you did," I said. He paused at the photo of Beatrice on the mantel. "She really was the strongest one in this family." "She still is," I replied. He turned to me, hesitant. "I hope we can start again. I didn't stand up for you when I should have. I let Gregory speak for all of us." "You don't have to explain," I said gently. "You're here now. That matters." We had coffee in the sunroom. He told me stories I hadn't heard. About his childhood. About how Beatrice once secretly paid for his tutoring when he nearly failed his first year of college. About how Gregory had always expected perfection, and how that pressure had shaped them both into shadows of what they could have been. When he left, he hugged me for the first time in years. That night, Nathan called. "I've been offered a sabbatical," he said. "A chance to step away from research for a year. I'd like to stay in Newport." "You'd be welcome," I said. "Here. In the house. If you wanted." There was a long pause. "I'd like that more than you know." The next morning, we walked the cliffs again. We stood at the edge, wind brushing our hair back, ocean roaring below. "It feels different now," he said. "It is different," I replied. "This place, it's not haunted anymore." He looked at me. "And you?" "I'm not haunted either." Because the ghosts had names now. And the house had stories worth telling. And the blood that once divided us now bound us in truth. And somewhere in the quiet warmth of the study, a portrait of Beatrice watched over it all, smiling at last. Spring arrived slowly in Newport, unfurling in hesitant bursts of green. The snow had melted into the soil, leaving behind fresh earth and a silence that felt different from winter, less like a pause and more like a breath before blooming. The estate, now officially registered under my name, stood tall but no longer imposing. I had opened the front gates permanently. The grounds were no longer cloaked in exclusivity. Every Saturday, locals wandered in to see the gardens Beatrice once loved. Children played beneath the cherry trees. Students lingered on the lawn to sketch the structure's architecture. And for the first time in decades, the house had a heartbeat that didn't belong to ambition or legacy, it belonged to life. My days had changed. Mornings began with tea in the sunroom, sometimes with Nathan, sometimes alone. I kept a journal, not out of habit, but out of hunger, to remember, to witness, to record the transformation I never thought I'd live through. My name was Isla Whitmore, but I was no longer just someone's daughter or someone's question mark. I had become the answer. I had become the author. One morning, a letter arrived from the Rhode Island Historical Society. They had heard about the archival wing I'd been building and asked to partner on a permanent exhibition featuring the Whitmore family's maritime legacy. But more than that, they wanted to highlight Beatrice. They called her a visionary. A preservationist. A woman who'd quietly championed education, art, and integrity behind the scenes while the men in her life battled over names and assets. I read the proposal aloud to Nathan, my voice trembling with something I hadn't felt in a long time, pride. "She would have liked this," he said. "She would have rewritten it herself," I joked. He laughed. "True. But she would have been proud of you too. You're building something bigger than a name." That night, I went through her journals again. In one entry dated nearly 10 years ago, she wrote, "I've spent a lifetime watching men rewrite the truth. But Isla sees things. She listens. She holds the pain and doesn't flinch. When I'm gone, if the world tries to erase her, I believe she will write herself back in. Underscore. I closed the journal and held it against my chest. She had known. She had always known. By late May, the house had become a quiet beacon in the community. We hosted monthly open lectures on family history, local heritage, and even on identity. I gave the first talk, standing in the same drawing room where Gregory had tried to erase me. I spoke not of betrayal, but of resilience. Not of lies, but of finding your place in a story that once tried to exclude you. After the event, a young woman came up to me. She was maybe 20, nervous, clutching a notebook to her chest. I just wanted to say, "Thank you," she said. I never thought I'd hear someone talk about blood and family and truth like that. My family's complicated too. I smiled. Most families are. The trick is not pretending otherwise. Later that week, a final envelope arrived by certified mail. Gregory's signature was scrawled across the top. Inside, a short letter. Underscore Isla. Underscore. Underscore you've made your point. Underscore. Underscore you got what you wanted. The house. The legacy. Nathan. Underscore. Underscore I hope it's enough. Underscore. There was no apology. No admission. Just a short, bitter sentence that tasted like ash on the page. I placed the letter in a drawer and forgot about it. It wasn't that I didn't care. It was that it didn't matter anymore. I had spent years craving his approval, bending myself into shapes that might earn a nod. Now I realized how small he had always been, how narrow, how fragile beneath his coldness. You can't lose what was never real. One evening in June, I sat on the porch with Nathan. The sun dipped behind the water, turning the sky gold and pink. We were quiet. There was nothing left to prove. I used to be afraid of this house, I said. Afraid I'd never belong in it. Afraid I'd always feel like a guest in my own story. And now? He asked. Now I don't care if I belong. I know who I am. That's enough. The wind shifted. The waves whispered. Somewhere inside, a lamp flickered on automatically. The house knew the rhythm of light and dark, of endings and beginnings. Nathan took my hand. Thank you for letting me come back. I didn't let you, I said. You were always part of this. And we sat there, two people piecing together what should have always been, while the house, her house, our house, stood behind us, no longer a monument to the past, but a promise to the future. One not built by inheritance, but by choice, by truth, by love. Summer settled gently over Newport, wrapping the estate in soft breezes and golden light. The flowers bloomed with unapologetic brilliance, and laughter echoed across the grounds from visitors wandering the gardens. It was hard to imagine this house had once been the center of so much silent warfare, of secrets spoken in shadows, of truths locked behind oak-paneled doors. I had begun to understand something Beatrice must have known all along. Names carry weight, but that weight is shaped by how you carry them. The Whitmore name, once heavy with arrogance and expectation, now felt lighter, more honest. Not because it had changed, but because I had. The exhibition honoring Beatrice opened with quiet elegance. Nathan stood beside me as we unveiled the central portrait, one of her sitting by the cliff, wind pulling her hair back, her gaze looking toward something just out of view. Visitors wandered through halls lined with her letters, early sketches of restoration plans, speeches she'd never delivered but had carefully written. Every artifact whispered the same message. She had never needed permission to lead, only space. People wept, smiled, lingered, and I watched from the corner, not as a curator or heir, but as someone finally rooted in the very soil that had once tried to bury her. A few days later, I received a message from Ethan. He was coming by, he said, not for legal matters or estate concerns, but to talk. He arrived alone, hands in his pockets, posture less guarded than before. We walked the perimeter of the garden, past the lavender hedges Beatrice had insisted on planting every spring, even when the gardeners said they wouldn't survive the coastal winds. She was always stubborn, Ethan said, breaking the silence. She was always right, I replied. He smiled faintly. I've been thinking a lot. About everything. About Gregory. About you. About what we let happen in our silence. I waited, giving him space. I want you to know I was angry at him, not you, he said. We were raised in his image, taught to value control, status, obedience. You broke that without even realizing it. You didn't play by the rules. That's why he couldn't stand you. I wasn't trying to break anything, I said. I just wanted to belong. Ethan stopped walking. You always did. We just didn't know how to see it. The apology wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. It was in his eyes, in the way he stood with both guilt and grace. And it was enough. Julian visited the following week. He had always been quieter than Ethan, more analytical. But he, too, came with no agenda, only stories. He brought photos from when we were children, memories I'd forgotten. Snowball fights on the back lawn, me sneaking into their treehouse, birthday cakes with too many candles. Do you think we could try again? He asked. As a family. On new terms. I nodded. Only if it's a family that doesn't erase anyone. He looked relieved. Deal. The estate was no longer a battleground. It had become a gathering place, a place where people returned, not because they had to, but because they wanted to. Nathan took on the role of advisor to the historical archive. Students loved him. He gave lectures on ethics in medicine and the human cost of legacy. He was the kind of mentor I always imagined he'd be. And every so often, he'd turn to me after a session and say, I still can't believe you're my daughter. Believe it, I'd reply. It's in the blood. But more than that, it was in the bond we'd rebuilt. Brick by brick. Word by word. One morning, as I reviewed a proposal for converting the old carriage house into a youth art studio, I found a manila envelope slipped under my office door. It was unmarked, but I knew the handwriting. Gregory. Inside was a single page. Underscore Isla. Underscore. Underscore I've lost everything. Underscore. Underscore the house. The firm. My reputation. You were right, I built it all on fear. I suppose I never really knew who I was without it. Underscore. Underscore I'm not asking for forgiveness. I wouldn't know what to do with it. Underscore. Underscore I just wanted you to know. I see now what Beatrice saw, and what I tried so hard to deny. Underscore. Underscore you were always a Whitmore. Underscore. He hadn't signed the letter. He hadn't needed to. I folded it once and placed it in the back of Beatrice's journal, right between her entry about legacy and her note about planting lavender against advice. I didn't write back. Forgiveness, I had learned, is not always something you give to the other person. Sometimes, it's something you carry inside you quietly until you no longer need to feel angry to feel whole. The summer pressed on. The estate buzzed with art shows, community dinners, children's classes. And I found myself smiling more often, laughing without flinching, because the house no longer carried ghosts. It carried laughter and sunlight and the low hum of possibility. One evening, as the sun dipped low over the sea, Nathan and I stood at the edge of the cliffs where Beatrice had once stood in that photo. She always looked forward, I said. So do you, he replied. And in that moment, I realized something. I had inherited more than land, more than money, more than the Whitmore name. I had inherited the freedom to choose who I would be, and I chose to live in truth. unapologetically. The final days of summer passed with a kind of quiet brilliance. Mornings were cooler now, and the garden's edges softened as the first hints of autumn crept into the trees. The estate had never been more alive. Children sketched beneath the sycamores. Visitors sat on stone benches reading Beatrice's archived letters. Inside, the house smelled of paper and light and lavender oil, her favorites. I walked through the halls barefoot some mornings, just listening to the creak of the floorboards, the hum of air through vents, the distant laughter of someone finding a piece of their history in one of our exhibits. The mansion no longer intimidated me. It welcomed me. I belonged to it. And it, somehow, now belonged to everyone. Nathan's sabbatical stretched longer than expected. He had found a rhythm in Newport, a home, really, and the need to return to the frenetic research labs of his old life seemed to shrink more each day. He spoke of starting a foundation in Beatrice's name, one that would fund women-led preservation projects. I told him she would have called it long overdue. She always had her eye on what was next, he said one night, over tea in the sunroom. So do I replied. That week, I received a letter from the State Historical Society. The Whitmore Archive had been selected for a regional award, recognizing our efforts to reclaim and preserve a truthful family legacy. I sat alone after reading it, thinking not about the accolade, but about how much had been hidden before I arrived at the truth, and how much lighter everything had become after it. When I called Julian to share the news, he congratulated me sincerely. "You've done something none of us could have imagined," he said. "You turned a house full of ghosts into a home full of meaning." Ethan visited a few days later. He helped with the youth art studio we'd been building in the converted carriage house. He stayed longer than expected. He seemed lighter, too. Less rigid. Less haunted. It wasn't just the estate that was healing. It was all of us. And though Gregory remained silent after his last letter, I heard that he had taken a small teaching position upstate, history, ironically. No lawsuits came. No last desperate attempts to reclaim what had been lost. It seemed even he had come to understand. The war was over. My mother, Lillian, visited often now. We no longer spoke in coded words. We spoke plainly, like women finally walking side by side instead of across generations of silence. We even laughed sometimes, real laughter, the kind that echoed without apology. One afternoon, we sat under the magnolia tree that Beatrice had planted decades ago. "I think she always wanted you to have it," my mother said. "The estate?" I asked. "No," she smiled. "The freedom to choose your own path. To speak your own truth." The wind rustled the leaves above us. The scent of blooming jasmine drifted through the air. I realized then that for all the wealth the Whitmore name carried, the real inheritance was permission. Permission to be more than someone else's idea of legacy. At the start of September, we hosted a small ceremony. Nothing extravagant, just a gathering of community members, family, students, and old friends of Beatrice. It was to unveil the new plaque mounted near the front gate. Whitmore House, home of Beatrice Whitmore and the generations of truth-tellers who followed. I stood before it, the breeze tugging at my dress, and spoke for just a moment. This house once belonged to silence, then to lies, then to fear. But now it belongs to memory, to healing, to purpose. It belongs to everyone willing to tell the truth, even when it costs everything. There were tears, applause, and a soft, long silence that said more than words ever could. That night, as Nathan and I stood on the balcony overlooking the sea, he handed me a small box. Inside was a necklace, simple, silver, with a tiny compass pendant. "So you'll never forget where your true north is," he said. "I already found it," I whispered. "It's right here." And I meant it. In my chest. In this house. In every letter, every photo, every face that had come through its doors not seeking perfection, but seeking something real. Later, I stood alone in Beatrice's study one last time before closing it for the night. The desk was tidy, her chair draped in the same shawl she always used. On the wall behind me, her portrait watched with a knowing look. I approached it and whispered, "I kept my promise." And for a moment, I swore I saw her eyes shine with approval. Then I turned off the light and stepped into the hallway, not to leave the past behind, but to carry it forward on my own terms. Because I was no longer the girl who needed a seat at the table. I was the woman who now decided where the table should stand. Autumn rolled into Newport with a quiet authority. The leaves turned gold and copper, the air sharpened, and the estate dressed itself in new colors as if it, too, understood change. The Whitmore mansion no longer symbolized status or old money. It had become a living story, one that spoke of reclamation, resilience, and renewal. I began teaching workshops in the library where Gregory once ruled with unspoken judgment. Young women came from nearby towns, curious about architecture, history, and the art of telling a story that had once been denied to them. I watched them walk the same floors I had once tiptoed across, heads high, laughter-free. This, I thought, was the real inheritance, confidence built on truth. The house had grown louder, not with conflict, but with creation. A small theater group now used the ballroom for rehearsals. A painter set up a studio in what used to be Beatrice's sewing room. The air was thick with purpose, not pressure. And when people asked me what the estate's future looked like, I no longer said I didn't know. I told them, "It looks like this." Nathan remained in Newport. He bought a small cottage near the harbor but spent most days here, helping catalog medical documents for the foundation we launched in Beatrice's name. Watching him fold into the rhythm of community life was like watching an old clock begin to tick again, not out of obligation, but because it had finally been wound with care. One evening, as the sun began to fall behind the cliffs, he joined me on the east veranda. We had grown comfortable in our quiet togetherness, speaking in silences as much as words. "I'm thinking of writing a book," he said. "About what?" I asked. "About her. About you. About what inheritance really means." I looked out at the sea. "Write it. People need to know that family isn't just about bloodlines and birthrights. Sometimes, it's about the ones who stayed when it would have been easier to leave." He nodded. "You know, Isla, you're the reason this place is still standing." "No," I replied. "Beatrice made it stand. I just made it open." And that was the truth. The day the state officially designated the Whitmore estate a historical and cultural landmark, I stood on the front steps and looked at the brass plaque now mounted near the door. The wind tousled my hair. Guests lingered on the lawn, children running between the hedges. Reporters snapped photos. But all I saw was her, Beatrice, standing just behind the veil of time, proud. My mother stood beside me, holding my arm. "I almost lost you," she said softly. "I almost let someone else define you for good." "You didn't," I replied. "You're here. That's what matters." She smiled through tears. "You know, she would have called this a revolution." "She started it," I said. "I just finished what she couldn't." That night, I walked the halls once more alone, barefoot, as I had done that first summer. The moon poured in through the tall windows, painting silver paths across the marble floor. The portraits no longer loomed. They watched. They witnessed. And I no longer avoided mirrors. I looked at myself without apology. I stopped in the library, where the original family tree once hung, a cold chart of names and dates. I had it replaced. Now, at the center of the wall, hung a painting of Beatrice holding infant me, an intimate, warm portrait captured from an old photo. Around it, branches extended with handwritten names, but not just biological ones. Family by choice. Family by truth. Family by love. At the very top of the tree, written in Beatrice's own script, a quote, Legacy is not what we leave behind in vaults, but in people. I stood before it for a long while, hands folded, heart still. The world outside continued turning. I knew there would be more challenges. Legal, emotional, human. The past doesn't vanish. But now, I wasn't afraid of it. I carried it. I shaped it. And I honored it by choosing a future it never dared imagine. A future where truth wasn't buried for the sake of appearances. A future where women didn't need to earn their place at a table they built. A future where I, Isla Whitmore, was no longer someone else's shadow, but the heir she made. The one who carried her name with light, not weight. The one who opened the doors and left them open.